Okay. So, are we ready back there? All right. I'd like everybody to turn around and wave to the camera. Welcome, everybody. We're happy that you're tuning into this. Thanks for coming. Okay. So, this is one of my favorite sessions, actually, and I debated whether to do this one as a plenum or to use the one that I did. But the one that I did is chapter 1, if you like, and this is chapter 2. They come together in sort of a general perspective on who we are at this moment in time and what the challenges are for Jews, at least in the United States, but I suspect in England as well. There will be differences, obviously, different sensitivities, sensibilities, but I actually did some of this with the rabbis when I met with them, and they thought that it did touch them very deeply. And so I have confidence that much of what I say will touch you also. I recognize also that it's somewhat controversial. When I talked about limits, truth, and meaning first, those ideas had occurred to me back in the 1980s, actually. A women's group had met in the first women's conference, I think, in the United States, Jewish Women's Conference. They called it Shekhinah. And they invited me to give a paper at it. I was enormously honored. And they asked me to respond to the question, are women allowed to write their own prayers and to change the prayer book? In 1983, that was a question. So I wrote the paper that I gave here to say to them, you've got the wrong question. If you ask, may you, and if you want me to look at the Talmud and the codes and so on, I'd have to say that maybe not. But you don't really want to know that anyway. You're going to do it anyway, and good luck to you, and I think you should be doing it. And that reminded me that we were past the age of limits, even though some reform in our country, in the United States, some pull up a chair, there's lots of room, even though, can you back up just a little so we have this, thank you. So even though we were Reformed Jews and we knew that we didn't follow the halakha, nonetheless, there was a lingering sense that if you want to be authentic, you got to justify what you do according to the Talmud. And I thought, we can't do that. That's not what we do. We still read Talmud for other reasons. Now you know why, for meaning. So that was the first step in this rather lengthy journey I've been on, trying to think differently. There were other steps along the way, but the latest is to rethink what is Judaism altogether, and what is religion altogether. Now that's a really important question for you, because you live in a more secular environment than I do. America is secular, of course, but it's still, believe it or not, kind of like a Christian country, and now more and more people are religious, at least on the far right. And so how do you respond to people who say, religion? I've been there, done that. I don't like it. Well, of course they don't like it, because where they've been and where they've gone, I wouldn't like it either. But still, how do you speak to a secular person who says, why would you be interested in religion? What is this all about? So I want to redefine religion in a way that works. Now, when I say redefine religion and redefine Judaism, I emphasize these are working definitions. These are not essentialist definitions. I'm not giving you the essence of like, this is Judaism, now you know. These are working definitions, and we judge them by how successful they are in helping us move forward on our task of building Jewish institutions, continuing Judaism for the next generation, building a Jewish community, Jewish people around the world, and so on. So it's really a question of what works. So I'd like to start with, we're going to start by the definitions, and then I'm going to ask you something about your identity, and that's going to lead us to the question of what identity is in our time. And then thirdly, we're going to end up with talking about conversations. And remember, this is just what works. Okay, so Let's start with religion. I intimated what it was in my plenum conversation. I said to you at that time that just before I gave you the 3 animal stories, I said to you, we human beings are the only species that uses language as we do, and that therefore has history and biographies. We are in the business of building our own biographies, whether we know it or not. We first ask somebody, so tell me about yourself. What do you say? So you kind of stumble around and you learn to say something about yourself. If I were a therapist, you'd say other things about yourself. So we're careful who's asking the question. Once again, it's practical, right? It's what works. What works in therapy isn't what works for a friend who says, tell me about yourself, or if it's a job interview, tell me about yourself. We have different selves, and that's how when we get to identity, we'll emphasize that. But for now, I want to think of what I will call it the human condition. The human condition is self-consciousness. Self-consciousness as a person who exists through time, who was born and who will die, and who is building a biography, an autobiography, as we go through life. We are the only species that is self-conscious of being a species and of where we go. Other animals work by it's built in with them, right? They hunters, that's what they do, they hunt. They know how to procreate. They eat because they need to nourish themselves. We're the only species that does more than that. We eat as a social matter. We don't just eat because we're hungry. Sometimes we eat when we're not hungry and wish we didn't. But we eat because that's the way you socialize with people, right? We have sex not just to have children, right? And we have relationships because we want to build connections. So we always have in mind something deeper, greater, something about personhood, something about what makes us distinctively human. In my earlier talk, I said that means meaning in our time. But if you think that that's the human condition, then I would like to say there is such a thing also as the human project. The human project is the response we make to the human condition. So, the human condition is loneliness unless we have relationships. So we develop ways to have relationships. The human condition is we want to eat food that we can invite people to. So we learn recipes and we become cooks and chefs and make things, even if we don't like them ourselves. We make them because the other people might, right? So we are constantly in mind, without even thinking about it, about how do we handle the human condition. Much of the human condition is fear. Fear of being overwhelmed by nature. Now with the global crisis in the ecology, all the more so are we afraid. But we are constantly afraid. We're afraid of being rejected. We're afraid that we will wake up sick. We're afraid that someone we love will die. We are constantly worried about our relationships, our own bodies, all the things that matter to us. And the natural condition in the state of nature is to be afraid. I mean, Hobbes had it right. In a state of nature, life is short, nasty, brutish, and short. And so we constantly try to overcome that. That's the human project, to build meaningful lives. That's where the game of meaning comes in. Religion, I want to say, as a definition, working definition. And this is what I say to people, why are you religious? Right? Religion is the practice, you'll see why I use this definition in a moment, is the practice of communicating in a register and range that does justice to the fullness of the human condition. Practice of communicating. Practice meaning religion insists we do this. communicating because we are communicative animals, usually through talk, but also through the arts. So I don't want to say just speaking, because sometimes the arts gives us truths that just talking won't manage. You hear a great song and you begin to cry, and that's a communication. So it's a practice of communicating. Register is the level at which we communicate. When you talk to your child, oh, itsy bitsy is not good. That's called a low register, right? But we have a higher register. Our ordinary conversation is, hey, how you doing? Well, I don't know, not so good. What's up? I don't know. You don't even finish your sentence. Doesn't matter. Nobody cares what you said anyway. That's a relatively ordinary register. But some parts of life are ordinary. So we have a register when we talk about food. Hey, I hear there's a restaurant next door. They just opened up, and you say, yeah, there you are. Or if I say to you, this was the greatest thing I've ever eaten. Do you have a recipe for this? Sure. Exactly. Or sometimes I say, I can't believe the styles today. Good God, I look awful in them. I hope they go back to the old style. I at least look good that way. I mean, then we're talking about our bodies and about how we look and so on and so forth. So we have all kinds of things. All of that's the human condition. Judaism, fortunately, speaks about the entirety of the human condition. I'm very happy that we have such thing as Jewish food. I'm very happy that we have such thing as Jewish films and so on. And then we have conversations about all of that, right? So that's why we have a range. So it's the commitment or the practice of speaking in a register, but various registers, really, and a range about everything, really, that's human. In a register and range that does justice to the fullness of the human condition. And that's where we are different than everybody else. Religions are different. Because mostly we don't have conversations about life and death. Mostly we don't have conversations about, I'm going through a midlife crisis, I don't know what to do with my life. Mostly we don't have conversations with ordinary people, about, but I need a community. What should the community look like? How can we study more? Or how can we study less? Whatever it happens to be. Religion is the only human response to the human condition that actually has discussions of all of that. So our religion should, therefore, make place for what we would call spiritual conversations, for services, worship, our tefillah, that should make us think about who we are deeply, connect us to the Jewish people in profound ways. When we walk out, we should be changed, because that's a communication when we pray. And when I walk into a synagogue, even the look of the place communicates to me. So what does it look like when I walk in? How do people treat me when I walk in? If I walk in and someone scowls at me at the front and says, well, you can't come in yet. I mean, what does that say? Or if I don't look like everybody else, right? Because I'm not a white Ashkenazi Jew, preferably male, then, and they look at me like, what are you doing here? Or the kitchen's over there. I mean, come on. So it's how we treat people. So that's a communication too. There are individual communications. As a religious person, I communicate in a certain way with a certain respect. As a Jew, I communicate with Jewish values in mind. As a Jewish organization, everything we do in the organization communicates. And we should have room for a register about everything. If people want to come in and talk about their kid, wonderful. If they want to come in and talk about cooking, hi, come join us. Do you want to make space, please? If people want to come in and talk about food, if they want to say, oh, we're going to have a whatever, we're going to have a Tu B'Shvat Seder or something like that. Wonderful. But there should be also a recognition that when I walk into this place, there's something about it that's sacred. Meaning, here is the room where I can actually admit that I have existential questions, and religion answers them. So I look at my institutions, my synagogues, and I say, is that true? And where I come from, it often isn't. When I come from, They're often very busy. They have programs all the time, but there's not a lot of thoughtfulness. One of the things I admire, I said this earlier today, one of the things, in some session or other, one of the things I admire about liberal movement is that somehow when I'm with you, I get a sense of a greater seriousness than we have in the United States. The United States isn't really good at being serious. And there's not a lot of thoughtfulness. And sometimes I think the range of conversation is more limited. There's no room for conversation. I'm not talking with being heavy, like you're walking in and say, who died in your family today? I don't mean that. But I mean having a sense that this is the place where I can address those questions. And many of our synagogues, anyway, don't. That's one of our problems. But at any rate, the range often isn't there, and often the register fails. So I have no objection to guitars, for example. I was one of the people who kind of pushed them on us. So now you won't like me, I don't know. But at the time, we were using only an organ, and that was a limited register. A lot of people didn't touch. So when people started playing the guitar, Debbie Friedman in particularly, I welcomed it. Now, sometimes in America, all we get is a guitar, and it's all very nice. You walk in, and they're all singing the same song, and the guitarist is strumming, usually not very well, because he or she didn't learn it very well. And you say, well, all right. And you sing along for a while, and then you sing along a little more, and then you sing along a little more. And next thing you know, the service is over. You say, wait a minute. There's got to be a message? Didn't the rabbi have something to say to me that was worthwhile? I mean, come on. So maybe we have a Dvar Torah, but too many in America, often the Dvar Torah is something so simple that, gee, I could have thought of that, and it probably did. In any event, it's uninteresting. I mean, that's that's our fault. That's our trouble. I don't mean everyone's like that. Don't get me wrong. I tend to overstate the cases because then I wait for you to push back, and then I decide whether I agree with myself. I really do. That's my standard way of being. But I've thought about this, and I think we've lost a lot of seriousness in the United States. Well, there should be everything. There should be fun, and there should be seriousness, and at least in worship, the fullness of the human condition should be addressed in some way. So that's what religion is, okay? That's what Judaism is then. Judaism is our unique religious response to the human condition. We learned to speak Jewishly, which is to speak in a Jewish vein, using all in a range and register that does justice to the human condition. Good, okay. You with me so far? Am I clear, yeah? Secondly, we live in a time when identity has become crucial. Let's try a little exercise. Just shortly, because we only have an hour, we have an hour and something, whatever. You tell me when I've got half an hour left. I don't count time very well. Among other things, I don't do well as I'm not good at time, addresses, geography, things like that. If I ask you who you are or what you are, right? You would say, I say, so who are you? And you finish the sentence, oh, I am a, what's the rest of the sentence? It's just an exercise. It does not have to be profound. I mean, I won't hold you to it for the rest of your life. But I am a, what would you say?
In this context, I'd say a liberal Jew, but if I was talking to someone else, I'd say I'm a Livingston football fan.
Okay, so you're a liberal Jew who loves football.
Yeah.
And what team?
Livingston.
Very good. I won't, not just football in general.
Yeah, but it's
Yeah, okay. Who are you?
I'm half English, half Dutch, Irish Jew.
You're an Irish Jew.
Yes.
Yeah, you're in Cork, as I recall.
Yes.
I'd love to visit you someday. I've always wanted to go there. All right, you're an Irish Jew.
I'm
Okay.
a parent of 4 children.
An Irish Jew is a parent of 4 children. Thank you. So, somebody else.
I'm a British
So you're British, and you mentioned being a grandparent, and mother and grandmother, and a woman. You mentioned woman, which so far no one said I'm a man or I'm a woman yet, but I knew that would come up sooner or later, right? Hey, Dahlia. Yeah, so who are you?
I'm a Jewish Latin American woman.
Now you get something different, right? I'm Jewish, Latin American, and a woman, okay? Dahlia, well, how would you answer that question? What would you say?
I'm an Israeli Reform rabbi, a mother, spouse, daughter, sister,
See how they get,
and a researcher of Jewish literature.
now notice how it gets longer, because when you first start, you don't know what to say. So you're used to saying, hi, I'm a Jew. You say, the context here, I'd say I'm Jew. Then you added and you said, well, football fan also, right? But then when people have more time to think about it, other things get added. Now I want to, by contrast, we'll sort of, by contrast, I give you the story of Jonah. Remember Jonah from Yom Kippur? And the boat is about to capsize, and the sailors call on Jonah. They know it's his fault, and they say, who are you? And he says, I'm a Hebrew. He doesn't say something like, well, I'm a Hebrew. I'm a Hebrew, and I'm a man, obviously. And he says, and he doesn't say, oh, I'm a prophet. That's right, I'm a prophet. But actually, I'm between things at the moment, right? He doesn't, that would be a more honest answer. He doesn't say that because once upon a time, when you were, if to say he was a Hebrew, was to say the important thing about him, meaning he says in the next sentence, I worship the God, the Jewish God. That's what it means to be a Hebrew. In those days, your ethnicity, your nationality, your religion, they were all the same thing. This is commonplace before you get to modern societies. Modern societies split us off into many different selves. And we decide in the context, as you said correctly, well, in this context, I am. You learn what part of yourself to present, depending upon who's asking and what the context is and what you want to get across and whether you have a goal, like you want to get the job or not, right? So we have inherited a situation just by living now in which we are very conscious of our many identities. That was helped along enormously by the feminist movement, because women taught us the whole world. They say, wait a minute, you've ignored me. I'm a woman. Look at me, I'm a woman. And once that cat was out of the bag, then other things began happening. So people of color said, nobody ever pays any attention to me. Hey, I'm here too. And therefore I'm black, or I am African American, or I am, I don't know, as you just said, actually. So where we come from, or what our other identities are. I'm a woman of color. I mean, there are all ways that people express themselves. So we become, in our age, curators of our identities. We can add that then to the human condition. In our time, the human condition very largely, at least in our society, I don't think this is all around the world, certainly if you don't have enough food and that you're constantly just trying to find food for yourself and your kids, let's say, then you don't have the luxury of this. But in our society, we have the luxury of curating our own identity. I can be a Jewish, I'm an American, well, I'm sort of Canadian too, but I mean, I could say I'm American, but sort of Canadian, Reformed, Jew, retired, but failing retirement, and aging. And someday I'll fail aging. Now I'm getting serious. But what you want to say is up to you. We curate our own identities. That's enormous.
I just think that at least my relationship with North American people these days, we are kind of escaping from this freedom a little bit, and people forcing you to identify in ways that you not necessarily choose to identify. The whole shenanigans with the, sorry, that's my opinion, but with the pronouns that you have to identify, even if you don't choose to identify your sex, your sexual preferences, things that you don't necessarily want to, and you're sort of forced to do so, otherwise you're fascist, not ally, all these things. So it's not so all the time about me presenting myself the way I want to present, but there's some sort of coercion, or even I don't want to use stronger
you.
words, but you know what I mean.
I do know what you mean. And
It's not
sometimes
in the
I
UK, thank God.
and sometimes I feel that way also, because sometimes I'm in a situation where I'm forced to identify as something that I don't feel like. So people say to me, "You didn't say you're a white man." And I say, well, I guess I am. It's just that I didn't think about that. Now, maybe I should have, maybe I shouldn't have, I don't know. But I understand what you're saying. My point is going to be not so much that everybody does it all the time in a certain way, but that we are in an era when people feel the need to identify more and more, and then even the people who don't. Let's say what's going on in America, for example. So now all these people are saying, "I'm a white man, by God," right? They wouldn't have said that before, but now it's a point of identity because I don't believe in all your liberal junk, is what they're saying. Or somebody will say, I'm a white American Christian man. They didn't bother with that before, but now they feel threatened. Oh my God, it's not being a Christian country, should be a Christian country. Let's go back to the good old days when I was in charge, or whatever is going on. But we're in an era when people are forced more and more to think about who they are, for better or for worse. Yes, hi. I didn't see you on the right because my right eye, it doesn't work. So
That's
sorry.
okay. That's all right. So just like a little bit on your point, but for some of us, we've got no choice but to be seen in terms of visibly what we are.
That's right.
So whereas a non-Jew of colour will be able to, go through life with nobody identifying them as Jewish or a Jew, whereas for me, for a colleague across the way, people would naturally just automatically see us as black. They've already attached a label to us.
That's correct.
So there is something about, not that it's forced, but it's just visibly seen versus it's not visibly seen, and then how people treat you in that context.
Absolutely agreed. I don't think anyone meant to deny that, but I'm glad you said it. The best sentence I heard recently on that topic was I was talking about anti-Semitism or something like that in America, and I was talking to someone who was a Latinx woman, who said to me, well, she said, if they come for you, they'll come for me. And she said, but here's the difference. You'll be driving the truck because you look like everybody else, and I will be under the tarp in the back. True.
Can I just, in response to your comment, I think, and to yours, I think there are people who people can see their identity and judge them, and then there's people who can't, and it's a different experience of having to constantly come out and tell people who you are, and I think it's really important as part of allyship that I think that using pronouns and stuff is just supporting people whose identities have not been respected and who have not been welcomed and who are not represented, to say actually in this space, in this community, it is safe, and we recognise that different people have different gendered identities, and this is a safe space, and it is alien because historically we've never been welcoming to people who are trans or non-binary or any of those things, and it is a thing to get your head around, I think, for our generation, but I think it's really important in creating a safe and welcoming space for all.
So thank you. So what we're seeing here, I'm not going to continue that topic, if that's all right, because I need to move on.
The only thing I wanted to add is that you're not being asked to do things. You're just asked to create space for others. I have a lot of contact with Americans, and that's not my experience.
What we're seeing at the moment is the extent to which creation of identity goes very, very deep, so that people feel very strongly about it. I have learned from my own students exactly what you said about identity, and especially for people who are LGBTQ plus, who look sort of like other people, or they don't, or they want to look different, or one thing or another. And so it becomes hugely important. I think we all can agree on that. My point is simply to say at the moment that identity is exactly what this conversation has shown. It runs deep. We have strong feelings about it. And that just shows you that it's a touch point of our time. We are then charged, whether we like it or not, to be curators of our identity and to be able to say who we are, and we want people to appreciate us for who we are. We don't want to be in the closet and not tell people who we are. That's how we live. Now, my point is, now it just builds upon that. So, I don't mean to make light of our discussion. I'd happily have a longer discussion. One of the problems with the sessions here is you got to do the world in an hour, you know? So, I now just want to think about identity with you. Okay? So I want to say we have many identities, and there's several interesting things to see about that. First of all, identity, sometimes some identities are surface deep and some aren't. So in my country, part of my identity is kind of my official identity, which is basically a social security number and, I don't know, whatever I fill out on my income tax form. That's who I am. I'm a lot more than that, but that's, you know, who are you? I am 097, and so on and so forth. Now, we who know that Jews had numbers find that appalling. But for bureaucracies, that's all they want to know. My first, my last name, and how much income tax I'm going to pay, and for that they want to know my social security number. Sometimes you're a little more than that. Sometimes you have an identity that's even I'll call it technical identity. That's the identity people steal if they find your passwords on your accounts. And you say, oh my God, they stole my identity. They got into my bank account. They're running my computer. I've been hacked. Well, that's a serious identity, right? It's part of the great fear that we have that the old science fiction days, you go home one day and you open your door and somebody else answers and says they're you. Wait a minute, it's my house. No, it's my house. I live here, look. I live here. No, you live here. I mean, that's a common theme. We fear that someone will steal our identity and pretend to be us, and we won't be anybody. That's a frightening aspect. That, too, is an identity. And we can go deeper than that, too. And that's what we've been doing in this circle, where people say, I'm a she, he, or I'm a whatever it is, they, I mean, whatever you decide. And I am also Latin American, and I'm all the things that have come up. And each of us has our own answer to that, and each of us feels strongly about different parts of it and less strongly about other parts. I mean, I happen to be a professor. I don't really care too much about that. It's what I do for a living. If you ask me if I'm a rabbi, that I care about. I always wanted to be a rabbi. If you say, are you Jewish? I care about that a lot. But I also care that I'm a Reformed Jew, because I don't want to be confused with the Haredim, and so on and so forth. So that's the deeper level of identity. Now, I want to say that we have, imagine if we took away all the things that you mentioned, right? Let's imagine, for example, we know our bodies change every 7 years, right? Cell by cell by cell. You know, and suppose you changed physically terribly. All of a sudden, people have a heart attack and they suddenly age terribly. And I say about that person, God, I hardly recognized him, you know. Or say in addition that you changed your life enormously. Or hypothetically, let's say they took away from you all the things you mentioned, which is what they tried to do in the Shoah, to Jews, by the way. What was left of those people? Well, everything was left. Because in fact, we know that underneath all of that stuff, we are kind of a core person. There is such a thing as a core identity. And there are two ways that philosophers have described it and that I like very much. One way is by a Canadian philosopher, Charles, sorry about that. I'll think of it in a minute, who says, our core self, he says, is the self in moral space. That deep inside ourselves we inhabit a certain moral space, which is where what we will live and die for. But here I stand. I will not go beyond that point. If I violate my moral space, now I feel like I'm nothing. I'm a traitor to myself. So each of us has a certain inner core of moral space. And sometimes someone says to you that. Someone says, you know what? I will not do that, and here's why. And I say, well, all right, I understand. So the self in moral space is where we take our stand in the world on all the very important issues of life and death and good and bad and how we raise children, if we have children, how we treat our neighbor, what I will fight to the death for, you know. Will I do resistance or won't I? And all that sort of thing. The self in moral space. And we're negotiating that all the time. A second way of thinking of it is by Daniel Dennett, who says, a British philosopher, who says, our core self, this is lovely, is the center of narrative gravity. Isn't that nice? We are constantly deciding who we are. Remember, that's your story. And there's something like iron, what are they called? Iron filings? Like the iron filings gravitate this deep person that you are, and that's the story you tell about yourself. We are constantly negotiating that too. So, each of ourselves, each of the parts of ourselves are part of how we build our identity. And if I've suddenly discovered I'm a feminist, for example, I will now enormous attention to that part of who I am that I didn't even think about before. If I decide that I've converted to become Jewish, all of a sudden that becomes a big deal to me. That's why conversion to Judaism, that's why Jewish converts are generally more serious about Judaism than people who are born Jewish, because they didn't have to do it. They chose. That's a big, big decision. So whatever is important to you in your identity, you suddenly are aware of, oh my goodness, look at me, I am X, Y, or Z. You will spend a lot of time on that. But you're also forced by being human to spend time on who am I? That's the center of narrative gravity.
30 minutes.
And pardon?
I just was telling you it's 30 minutes because you asked us to. You asked us to remind you when there was 30 minutes left.
Oh, thank you. Perfect timing. You know, I've depended upon you so much the whole weekend. You've been great. Thank you. And the second part of it then, is that we are constantly negotiating what will I live and die for? What really counts to me? Okay, what values will I pass along? So if Judaism, as a religion, communicates in a range and registers that do justice to the fullness of the human condition, it means that Judaism needs to attend to those two critical human definitions of our identity. Out of the synagogue, they need to get a story of who they are. If they walk out of the synagogue and they think who they are and they say, well, I'm basically, and they run through 10 different things and they don't even think to say I'm part of the Jewish people, boy, have we failed. And if they walk out of the synagogue and they have a sense of moral space and they don't think they got anything from synagogue, they're still the same people. They don't have any, their morals haven't changed or haven't been fed into by what happens in the synagogue. Then the most critical efforts of human identity were never attended to. How do they get attended to? The answer is communication, because religion communicates in all of these registers and a range of it all. Which leads me then to the third facet of what I want to say. It is helpful, since mostly we communicate in language, and when we don't communicate in language, as when I hear an opera or a great cantor or I see a great artwork, right? Then what we do is we talk about it. So even when it's not in the language, then it evokes language from us. I remember when I first came to England, long time ago, Les Mis was the hot topic. And so I went to see Les Mis. And I get out of Les Mis and I go into the tube and there's this guy, I don't know him, he doesn't know me, and we look at each other, we both came from it, he starts talking to me, he says, wasn't that wonderful? I say, well, it was terrific. He says, I cried. I said, I cried too. I don't know this man. But we felt the need to communicate. We felt the need to talk. So I want to say a different way of thinking about Judaism, one that now is a practical way, pragmatic. Judaism is, above all, a conversation. Now, of course, it's other things. It's a culture, it's a prayer, it's all kinds of stuff. There's Jewish people, there's a Jewish state. I'm glad for all of that. But I think of Judaism, it helps to think of Judaism as a conversation. Since that's what human beings do. Our condition is to use conversation. We're languaged people. And if we focus on what the Jewish conversation is, we can make progress. Now, since you have conversations as many parts of your identity, so I have conversations about my professoring. I have conversations about other things, whatever else I am. Yeah, for example, my father started me collecting Israeli stamps in 1951 or 52, and I've collected them ever since. So I'm a stamp collector. Not that I care that much about stamps, but it's Israel, and I care deeply about Israel. So this is like a connection that and so I'm also a stamp collector. I have conversations about that. I go to a stamp show and I say, do you have a first day cover of this Israeli stamp that came out in 1955? What a boring conversation. But I talk about that. So we have conversations about every aspect of our identity all the time. How do we judge our identity when we think of it as conversation? Imagine that all your conversations of each day were put into a circle, a pie chart. And they're each labeled according to, we got a friend who plays basketball. He talks about basketball endlessly. Big chunk called basketball talk. He's also an artist, so big chunk about his art. He's a priest, so he actually talks about Catholicism a great deal. So if you look, but he doesn't marry, he's a priest, doesn't have a family. A very slim line about conversations of family. It's like a brother or sister and so on, but not what if you've got kids and you're at home. If you're raising kids, huge chunk goes into conversations about your home and your family and your kids, right? So we can judge the extent to which someone is Jewish by the extent to which their pie chart of Jewish conversations is large or small, multiplied by the passion with which they have those conversations. My priest friend, who is an expert at sacred space, has been a consultant for synagogues all over America as they think about how to change their space of their sanctuaries so that worship works. He knows more about Judaism than most Jews by now. He plays basketball in America in an environment where there's a Jewish community center, a JCC. And since he lives on the street, he goes to the JCC, and that's where he plays basketball. He's on the Jewish team at the JCC. So he tells me that at one point, he said, the team said to him, well, we'll meet next week for our practice. And he said to them, we can't, it's Shavuot. They didn't know. So he knows a lot about Judaism that they don't know. But he doesn't have the same passion. It's not his life. It's not his identity, you know? So theoretically, we should ask ourselves, how are we curating the Jewish conversation such that people find it interesting enough and deep enough that they walk home and have it? Yeah.
I feel slightly uncomfortable with that definition. As I think about my brother, who was brought up in a Jewish home, but he doesn't have the job I have. He doesn't work in the Jewish community. Right? He his kid had a bar mitzvah last year, so there was probably a lot of Jewish talk last year, but other than that, there's not a lot of Jewish talk in his house and not a lot of Jewish practice. I mean, they do have Friday night dinner, they do Kiddush, but that's probably about it for Jewish practice. They don't ever go to shul. I'm not more Jewish than him. He's Jewish, I'm Jewish.
That's worth my thinking about. That's a very good critique, as a matter of fact, and I have to think about that. This is all work in progress, so I appreciate your saying it. I mean, I have a first-order response that I can think about, you know.
I do think there's a difference in our identity, but I don't think I am more of a Jew than he is.
Well, what's the difference in your identity then?
I think Judaism is more important to me, but he is not less of a Jew.
You know, I understand that kind of judgment. So let me just finish the whole thing, and then we can, because I got to get to the end.
Sorry.
But I think, not sorry, but I like the response a lot, and I need you to think about that. It doesn't vitiate my concern that Judaism is best judged by what conversations do people carry with them. If they belong to shul, and if they never changes their conversation, then we're doing something wrong. If worship services are so unmoving that they never talk about them except to say, won't come back, then there's something really wrong. If the cantor who is singing sings in such a way that, oh well, very, very uninteresting, then there's something wrong with that. If we don't move people, if the rabbi doesn't have a message that's serious enough for people to want to talk about it on their way home and to say, hey, guess what the rabbi said, then the rabbi's doing something wrong. So I think our goal is to, it's just a new way of thinking about it. To what extent are we changing people to have a Jewish conversation? And if they do that, the more they will begin changing their internal core self to be more and more Jewish. And that's what we're ultimately about, right? So I think it helps to say, what is the task of a synagogue? The task of a synagogue is to be interesting enough and deep enough and relating enough that people will walk away from it changed, having more conversations about all the Jewish stuff and think more deeply about what their Jewish self is. Now, I want to say this is a very good definition if you're Jewish, because it's I don't know how it feels like if I tell this to a Catholic or to an Anglican, I have no idea. But we Jews, all of our literature is about dialogue and conversation. Look at the Talmud. It's nothing but a great big long conversation. And if you look about what a Talmud page looks like, there's a text in the middle, and then all the commentators are discussing the text. And then other people write margins to the margins, and they're discussing the people who are discussing the people who are discussing the text. We are a dialogue, we are a religion that prides itself on engagement through dialogue and through conversation. Now, there's so many other things that follow from this. The shape of your synagogue. If you want to rearrange, you look on your synagogue and say, this is a place where people feel comfortable to sit down and have a conversation. If they don't, maybe there's something wrong with it. They have their conversation somewhere else. I know one synagogue that actually has big room like this when you walk in, and couches all over the place, and tables, and books scattered around like you're in a big living room. People just come and they sit and they talk. I mean, think about that. So I think how we plan our synagogue, what we see as our goal, and how we can focus on what counts for success has to do with how interesting the conversation is. If you go to rabbinic school, who's going to go to rabbinic school? Somebody said, I'm going to become a rabbi. Yes, okay. So when you decide to become a rabbi, I think the task of your seminary is to make you interesting in a Jewish way, to outfit you, to have control over the Jewish conversation of the centuries, and be able to draw on it and continue that conversation in ways that are so interesting that people want to hang around with you and talk with you about that stuff. That changes the nature of what the rabbinic seminary is like. I could go on and on, everything changes. But anyway, to summarize, we live in an era where we are curating our identities, We have a core identity in terms of what we stand for and in terms of the story we tell about ourselves. We can think of who we are in terms of the conversations that we tend to have. Since religion responds to the human condition, and the human condition includes those deepest aspirations about what we stand for and what our story is, the task of the synagogue is to speak in all those registers and ranges and to communicate artistically as well, to create conversations. But finally, the last thing. This is perfect for our time because it means anybody can be part of the Jewish conversation at any point, any on-ramp. So you don't have to be born a Jew. You don't even have to fully convert. The question is, are you interested in our conversation? We put it out there. Rabbi's got a sermon, there's a service, nobody asks you at the door, have you been converted yet? You can walk in, you can sit down, and that's the way it should be anyway, that you feel welcome, and you become part of the conversation. My last story, I mentioned this in a synagogue in Washington, D.C. There was a boy who was bar mitzvah lessons after my talk, and his mother brought him, and they wanted to hear me talk first. So the kid sat there and, bored, I thought, naturally. And the parents listened, and then he went to his lesson. 6 months later, the kid is about to be bar mitzvah, and the parents are talking to the rabbi with the kid there, and the parents say to the rabbi, the grandfather of this kid isn't Jewish. But the grandfather had been very active in the synagogue because whenever he came to visit, he was a carpenter, and he would make things for the synagogue. And in fact, they had a Kiddush table that he made for the synagogue, and that's what he could contribute. That was his gift. And so everybody knew this was so-and-so's Kiddush table that the grandfather had made. And so the rabbi said, well, the problem is, he says, your grandfather's not Jewish, and we have a service, and I'm not sure that he can do the things that normally a grandfather would because, after all, he's not Jewish. And the kid piped up and he said, yeah, but Grandpa's part of the Jewish conversation. I think the kid was right. And they eventually worked out that the grandfather could have a role in that service. So in our age, when people are trying on different things, and when more and more people are people who may become Jews by choice, although we're all that, or we can opt out, or may not, but who are interested in it and want to grow into it, or have some interest in Judaism, I welcome them all. And knowing it's a conversation allows us to do that with an open heart and to welcome people into a conversation. Let me tell you, that's not nothing these days, because all the times people had a conversation in a party of 3 and you walked over and they shut up because you weren't welcome. All right, that's it, folks. Thank you.
This weekend is about having a conversation, isn't it? This weekend, the whole conference. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. I think our time's up. Is that right?
You got some time for questions? If you want.
Yes, perfect. I was about to say, what a terrible thing.
You got 10 minutes.
To talk about a conversation and not allow one. So I was just feeling badly. I saw someone at the door. I thought they were saying, but that was wrong.
No, you're good.
So let me hear what you think about it all. Give me your name so I can at least talk to you by name.
Yeah, it's Nick Silk from up in Edinburgh. I'm struggling to think of quite what the question is, but it's something you mentioned right at the very end about everybody can choose to be Judaism, but there's conversion, whereas all other, well, to the best of my knowledge, other religions, if you want to become Christian, if you want to become Muslim, you can go along and pretty much say, I'm now a Muslim, and I believe you're accepted, whereas that isn't the way in Judaism. I think the question is, does that impact in any way on what you've been talking about and the nature of, at some point you mentioned the Jewish religion and you mentioned the Jewish people, and I'm still trying to get my head around how it all fits together, if you can understand what I'm saying.
It's a wonderful question. First of all, other religions do have a conversion. For Christians, you got to be baptized. And unless you're baptized, then you can't participate. If it's the Church of England, for example, you can't participate in the Eucharist if you're not baptized. It's a question.
In England, you cannot participate if you're not baptized in the Church of England. It's not like a normal Protestant.
That's exactly right. But they do have baptism, which makes you a Christian. We have had formal conversion. I am of the mind, I know this might be somewhat radical, I am of the mind that anybody who wants to be part of the Jewish conversation can be. And I think at some point people become serious enough about being part of that conversation that it matters to them. They're in the process of defining their inner self, their core, by what happens in the synagogue. And I would make them full members. I would allow them to participate in services. I would not demand that they be converted. That doesn't mean that conversion doesn't mean something. At some point, people are in the conversation, but they know better than you do. I do anyway. They know that they're different still. And at some point, they want to throw in their lot with the Jewish people and the Jewish project. And at some point, they say to us, I would like to be considered a Jew fully because I really want to be part of this Jewish people in a way that I can't be if I don't commit myself. So I think conversion for us is a personal statement of life commitment that some people will make and some people won't. But I know many people who have never converted. They are the best members we have. They have complete Jewish homes and so on. They may never want to actually take that step. I asked somebody recently, why, just out of curiosity, he hadn't converted, And he said, well, I'm not sure I believe in God. I thought, what? Where he got that idea, you have to believe in God, I don't know. But you get the idea. So I'm actually very open. I actually think that the Jewish message, I'll go farther just to be a little more controversial. I think the Jewish message is a message of the human condition that humanity needs. I'm not out to convert people. I wouldn't do that. People should do what they want to do, and I don't believe in formal, what's the word when you, proselytizing. I don't believe in that. But I think that when we speak in our synagogue, rabbi speaks, the service speaks, and it should be open to anybody. There are all sorts of people out there who are searching for meaning and who are looking for some spirituality. And they haven't found it in their church, and they haven't belonged to church in 50 years or 20 years, or never joined. They never will. But they don't want to be secular either. So I think we should be speaking about the Jewish way of life, the Jewish message, which is a wonderful message. I mean, we're the ones who believe in science. How's that for, We're the ones who believe in hope. We're the ones who believe in all sorts of things. And that message should be available to anybody. So I would open my doors, as it were, to the extent that you feel comfortable, and make the message clear to anybody. I'm not addressing a non-Jewish audience particularly. I'm just also not addressing only a Jewish audience. And my message doesn't change. It's not like I'm watering it down or pandering. I'm giving the same message. And you can like it or not like it, but I think, welcome to the conversation. We can talk about it. That's a great question.
Here.
Yeah.
Here.
Yeah, whoever's got the yeah.
So I'm Andrea.
Yes.
So there is one thing that we always say, that a person that decides to be a Jew, or like a Jew by choice, but I think that in a sense, we are all Jews by choice.
Yes.
We choose to be Jews every day in our every actions. Like, we choose to be Jews and to put Judaism in our actions. And actually, I think that it's great part of the job of the rabbi, convincing people that really, or helping people to choose to be Jews every day.
Agreed.
This is one thing. The other thing is, when we talk about North American community or English community, saying that opening, that opening our doors and making people be part of, everyone be part of the conversation is less complicated than when you have, in other countries where the Jewish community is really small. And then you have to be really conscious about how you embrace these people in order not to harm the biggest community, which is really important. Like in Brazil, it is really, really, really dangerous to just open the doors and saying, oh, anyone who wants to be here and pray with us, please come. It's not that simple. Not that simple for the community itself, and not that simple for the community towards Israel and the biggest Jewish people. So I think that we have always to have the biggest picture in mind.
You're absolutely right. So what I'm describing is an ideal that works in a really open country where people are completely free to do what they want to do and where there's no threat. So you have to always be careful. I mean, any ideal doesn't always play out in every instance. But in my instance in the United States, it does play out, and I think it might here too. And only you will know that, not me.
I have two short points. One about the allying. I consider myself a strong ally to the LGBTQ community, but I don't like identity being imposed upon me if I don't choose to. I think adding pronouns can be very helpful for some people. It can be very life-endangering for some people, because either you have to lie or you have to say something that may endanger your workplace, your family relationships. So I think imposing identity markers on people is not a good idea by any standard. That's one thing. The second, I mean, if you choose to do that, that's great, but you have to choose to do that. And I've come across a situation when it was really imposed upon me. I had to ask not to add pronouns, and it was a big discussion. I know that it's not really happening in this country, but it happens elsewhere, as we know. That's one thing. The second thing, I completely, as a clergy and someone who works with the clergy-to-be, I agree with you about the importance for us to be engaging, interesting, mind-blowing ideas and all that. But there's also got to be something from the congregant. You know, you should come with some commitment. Yeah, sometimes the service is not great. Sometimes the cantor is not great, or the sermon is not great. But nevertheless, you come, you attend, you are present, because this is what you do. You not come for a performance or for a show or for a concert. You come because this is what you do as a Jew, or you don't come. You know, you choose the, you know. But I think it also has to be placed upon the individual, not only on the clergy.
Because we are human beings, right?
Well, in principle, I agree with you, obviously. I think, oh, sorry.
No, I was told that we don't need to convert other people because they already got a place in the world to come. You know, I was told, like Rabbi once said, that we don't need to convert other people because the non-Jews also have a world, like a place in the world to come. I don't know if that's true.
I don't know who said that or what it was exactly. Oh, so tell me again what the Orthodox rabbi said.
Too fast, sorry.
Yeah.
So an Orthodox rabbi said that we don't need to convert other Jews. So we don't need to convert people to come into Judaism because the non-Jews have a place in the world to come.
Oh, please. I certainly hope
Well,
they
I
have a
think-
share in the world to come.
Doesn't
and
that
I'm
relate to-
sure God will take care of that. But meanwhile, I'm more concerned about this world.
Doesn't that relate
Yeah.
to Christianity, where the Christians say if you don't believe in Jesus, you can't?
Yeah, that's a response to the Christian response, but I don't accept either response. You know. Yeah. So, sure. So, yeah, sure. Ideally, people have to bring something, and I do believe they should have responsibility. But I think it's utterly dysfunctional to tell people who don't feel responsible for something they should feel responsible for it, because first of all, they won't listen. Secondly, they won't talk to you anymore. And so thirdly, it's useless. So in principle, sure. But there are all sorts of people out there who don't feel that they should be responsible for coming to shul. As far as they're concerned, look, I tried it. I don't know. It doesn't speak to me, and I'm a busy person. So I think I do think that there's a responsibility for the rabbi especially, and the cantor, and not just the rabbi and cantor. I mean, I've done synagogue work for all these years, and I know the importance of lay people. You know, the people who are out, who are just come. They have a responsibility to be welcoming and to invite people in and to make them feel good and to do whatever they can. Once people feel that this is good, it's a nice place, then yes, they will develop that responsibility. I have an exercise where I take the council, in your words, board and mine, and I have them walk into the synagogue as if it were Friday night, because we have Friday night, mostly they come. And so they walk through. First, they meet in the parking lot, and we start from the parking lot on. And then I ask them to, like this game with kids, you know, freeze. So they stop, and I say, what would you be doing now if it were services? And they tell me. And then they get into the foyer, and I say, freeze, what would you be doing? And they always say to me, oh, I'd be looking for over here for Barbara. Oh, I love to sit with Hank. You know, I'd be looking for Hank. I look around, I see where my friends are, and then I go to see my friends. And then I say to them, what happens if you walk in the door and you don't know Hank and you don't know Barbara and you don't have any friends? Oh, huh. So I mean, so the regular people who come, it's their responsibility, I think, to act, to show Jewish, you know, to be welcoming to people and to invite them in. I just like to put more emphasis on the rabbi and the cantor, and not to say, well, it's their fault. They're not. I know you're not saying that, but
I don't
yeah.
disagree with you.
Of course you don't.
Of course I don't, but I just think that this personal responsibility, we're not here to entertain or to...
No, we're not here to entertain, but we are here.
think-
But I think we are here to develop the Jewish conversation in such a way that it's compelling. And if the cantor and the rabbi can't do it,
Okay, I think that other people are starting to come in for the next session, so we've got one last question.
Yeah, because I just that's okay. So just two really brief comments. One, in a way, we're kind of having a conversation about what rabbis, cantors can do. We're a really small community, so we've actually had to rely on actually community lay leaders and even members of the congregation actually doing things such as Divar Torah. So maybe we need to think about it's not just the power within the rabbis and cantors and the kind of officiated people, but there's a kind of broad spread of people to actually engage in the conversation. And two, I just wanted to pick up on what you said as well, but I think it's a really good point in terms of how we define who's a Jew, whether they actually attend shul, etc., and who's more Jewish or less Jewish. I think it's something we do need to come back to. And what does Judaism mean going forward? Is it our Jewish practice that we're trying to explore and get out there and, you know, make sure that as Jews, our practice in action is the kind of fundamental piece, or, you know, is there a different way to think about it?
a perfect ending, and it leads me to my last statement, which is I entitled this not who is a Jew, but when is a Jew. And a Jew is a Jew when you're acting like that. Someone is a Jew when they're in the Jewish conversation. Someone is a Jew when they come to the shul and they feel like they're part of the community. It doesn't mean, but it's not an all or nothing proposition anymore because we have many identities. So our job is to create moments when those who want to be part of the Jewish conversation and can be a Jew can feel that they can do it and grow into Judaism. Thanks, everybody. It's very
Thank
nice
you.
to see you.
Yeah. Yes, please.
My grandson's doing his GCSEs, he's 16. His religious
Oh, yeah.
Everyone. Thank you very much. If you can sit down now, we're nearly there. I sound like a teacher, don't I? Please sit down. Now, I am asked to assure you that we will finish at 4. By 4, you will get your coach at 4:10. Worry not. So, as we bring our conference to a close, well, what can I say? Hasn't it been wonderful? I've had such a nice time. My first duty, which is an absolute pleasure, and I make no apologies for this list, is a list of thank yous. This did not happen by itself, as you can imagine. First of all, I'm thanking the speakers. Thank you very much. As ever, these conferences give us food for thought, and people have made some really wonderful presentations. I've learned a lot. I'll be coming back to that. I thank the LJ staff. The LJ staff, yes. Haven't they been great? It's like, the duck on the surface paddling like mad, and it looks really calm. It hasn't always been calm, but I learned not to speak to anybody during the last week because I knew how busy they were and what short shrift I might get. But it's been great. And I said I wouldn't pick anybody out, which I didn't really mean. Charlie has been, stand up, Charlie. I don't even need to say what she's done, but Charlie is a complete tour de force, and I just know that when she's in charge, it all happens in the end. She works very hard. She's inspired. She's done so much. This is really, Charlie's brainchild. So well done. Thank you. While I've got the microphone and I'm enjoying myself, I'm just going to say, Charlie, she's a great chief executive. She's a great rabbi to me, great friend. I don't know what I would do without her. So there's 2 other people, Josie Kinchin and Jane Greenfields. Come up here, please. Where are you both? Where are you? Yeah. Always together. Come on. So these 2, and then look at them matching. These 2, they think alike. So, come up here. So they have, during just the last few weeks, really, really turned up the volume, and they've been calling round and doing so much to help, and really well and truly beyond the call of duty. Thank you 2 so much. Josie, Jane, these are for you. So welcome. And then there's the communications, what I mean by that is Leo and his staff. And Simon. Well, I was including you in the LJ staff, but yes, with the IT has worked so well. It's one of those things that you don't notice, do you, until it goes wrong, and then don't you notice. So, being an invisible interface between us and people at home, and so that you can all hear us, thank you very much for doing a really competent job. I need to thank the hotel staff again. Yes, you see, see what I mean? Things like, I can be a bit basic here, but the toilet's clean and with toilet paper. The food served on time. Everything's cleared up quickly. People being polite and friendly. Somebody even found me a cup of tea in the night when I got up and didn't want to disturb everybody. So it's just been really, really good, hasn't it? Isn't it? It's been clean, it's been lovely. It's again one of those things that you notice when it doesn't go right, and it's worthwhile saying when it does. So thank you to the hotel staff. And the last on my list of thank yous, although not the end, me, I'm afraid, is to thank you all for your company. You know, to say it wouldn't be the same without you is a total truism, of course, but it's been really nice to have a coming together of the clans, a real get-together, a chat, to meet people that we haven't seen for so many years, or, you know, not together at least, and to meet new people. So give yourself a round of applause. You've been absolutely first class. Now, outside of the biennial, there's also a little matter of creating a new movement. And obviously, I'm not doing it by myself. I have a cog in the wheel, though. And it's been useful for me, this conference, to give a compass, various things of, of where we should be going, what should be important to me. And one thing that's come through is it must be very meaningful. I mean, the whole process. I mean, we have a process of things we need to do, undoing the knots. We know about that one. But the trajectory for me is going to be very clearly directed, a very Jewish and meaningful route for the new movement, for where we will be. Rest assured about that one. And of course, also, I was listening to, I can't remember which one it was, but talking about the rules, how rules are ritual, and how we need to get that sort of thing right as well. So having a meaningful movement, a new movement, with clear, strong rituals. And of course, it's the rituals that keep us all together and will be our longevity. The rules of engagement. I mean, we discuss things. Occasionally, we don't quite see eye to eye. You know, a lot of things. I listened to Judith Rosenberry, I can't read my writing, and Leah, and talked about a number of things. That one of them was about, I think it was, we should have, is it agnostic or is it agnostic? Which one was it? It was not, the opposite was antagonistic communication, which was bad. It's, okay, so the right one was agonistic, which is when we debate, you know, in the name of God, but we debate to get to the best, and we listen to other people, and we let them speak. And the antagonistic is the one we aren't going to do, which is when you try and crush somebody and therefore destroy their arguments that way. So that is something that, you know, I will be holding. And he talked about a shukla who, when you're it's hard to maximize good, but it's easier to minimize cruelty. And to as we're developing the new movement, have that clearly in mind that that a good way of making the right decision is the one that minimises cruelty in the world amongst us. And the other thing is listening to about how the changes when with the prophetic Judaism, the rabbinic Judaism, the Judaism of the Kabbalah in the Middle Ages, the Judaism after the Shoah, and now I'm not putting this change in that category. I'm really not. But change is traditional in Judaism, is what we've done always. It's why, after thousands of years, we're still here, alive and strong. So, you know, let's not think is there a conflict between liberal and Judaism? I don't think there is. I think liberal Judaism is doing what we've always done. And so that's what I am taking away from this, you know, in the development of the new movement, and I'm sure you'll all have much that you're taking away as well. So thank you all very much, and I'll hand over now to Ed, Kessler, and Charlie to finish the session. Bye.
Thank you, Ruth. I mean, I'm not going to say very much now, Ed. I think I just want... So, I introduce Ed. Hopefully, most people here know Dr. Ed Kessler, who is one of our vice presidents, but has also just been such a good friend to us as a movement, but also really personally, of being somebody to be able to talk to and think with, and really, I just appreciate that you're here and everything that you've done to support us. But I am also really interested in how has the weekend been for you?
Thank you, Charlie. Let me begin very quickly with a story about the rabbi and the taxi driver. I'll explain why. who get to heaven at the same time. And the angel comes out and says to the taxi driver, come on in, and looks at the rabbi, sorry, Charlie, and says, and the rabbi says, what do you mean? I've devoted my life to the community. And not to put too fine a point on it, the taxi driver, he drove like a lunatic. And the angel said, yeah, you're right. But let me tell you, when you delivered your sermons, everyone fell asleep. But when they went into his taxi, boy, did they pray. So the reason I mention that is I hope you won't need to pray again until Mincha. And I will offer some very, very brief remarks. But you probably know that one of the great founders of liberal Judaism was Claude Montefiore. And he wrote a book about 100 years ago called The Old Testament and After, probably one of his most important works. And I was interested in it because he talked about the future, and that's what we're talking about this weekend and what I've certainly taken away. And one of the things he said that liberal Judaism has, and I'm sure that's the same for our Reform brothers and sisters, is a sense of freedom. The freedom to modify, a freedom to adopt, a freedom to drop certain things. He also emphasized the prophetic element of liberal Judaism, social justice, equality, issues that are as important to us today as they were to the founders, the 3Ms, 100 years ago. And finally and thirdly, good things come in threes, is the ability to take from society what we need to take, the good things that we can learn from around us, not to feel that we have to retreat within. And that's what's so, for me personally, so wonderful about this weekend, is how we've learned from one another, and now we're opening up to learn from our Reform colleagues. So the freedom from the past, the freedom in the present, but what does that mean for the future? Because we're all going to go home, we're going to be thinking about what's next. Well, the ruptures that Larry Hoffman touched on, and actually Joel as well, were the big changes in our society. Whether it was destruction of the temple, whether it was the creation of the printing press, and we're now going through another transformation, which of course is the technological revolution, which people of my age and above are not as au fait with as our children. But this technological revolution is already affecting us, and it's that technological revolution which we've actually implemented pretty well in the COVID situation. How many times have we spoken to one another about how COVID affected us in our communities? Just in one of the sessions I was at, Reading linking up with Edinburgh, I think. Was that right? Lincoln, okay, and Leicester and Edinburgh. So all of these connections we can now make to sustain our small communities. The connections are, of course, fundamental to our future success as a movement. People like Charlie have to and want to engage with and learn from everyone else. The rabbinate needs to engage with its communities to make sure the communities go along with them. And the way we do that between us is to build up that trust, to build up that respect, and to know that how to engage in communication and dialogue. Now, dialogue is not simply getting on the phone or sending a WhatsApp message. Dialogue means taking seriously what somebody else holds, the concerns that they have, putting yourself in their shoes. It's not an easy exercise, actually pretty costly. And one of the things about dialogue, whether it's interfaith dialogue, which is my world, or whether it's the intra-Jewish dialogue, or whether, frankly, it's the intra-LJ dialogue, is the need to take seriously the other as much as you want to be taken seriously yourself. If we can begin to do that, there's no problem. There's no problem. We will implement these changes over the next 2 years. We will rejuvenate not only the progressive movement in this country, but frankly, Anglo-Jewry, which needs a bit of a push, right? And Anglo-Jewry has this eminent, incredible history, but it's got a little bit tired. Looks a bit like me after a late night. And this rejuvenation is what we can bring. And we're going to do that not just through us, but through the next generation. One of the challenges we have is to listen to and be seen to be taking seriously that emerging leaders generation, that post-Bar Mitzvah generation, that post-Kabbalat Shabbat generation. It means we're going to have to rethink what our synagogues are for. You know, why is it there are declining services? My friends, it's because they ain't so interesting to plenty of people. You know, Why is it in Cambridge, Chabad have 70 students on a Friday night, and the Reformed Synagogue, lucky to make 2 or 3 students in the community, because not all students want to get up Saturday morning at 10:30. They have a Friday night dinner, particularly if it's free, right? So we need to think about how we're going to reach those students to really liberate that energy that they bring, whether they're students, whether they're left university but haven't taken, aren't in families, or whether they're just in a post-bar mitzvah stage. So one of the things Larry said, sorry to pick up on you, Larry, but one of the things that you said was connecting the dots. It resonated with me, because when I teach, there are so many dots around, I don't know how to connect them. I need help connecting them. And the only way that we're going to connect those dots in a way that creates a beautiful picture, rather than just a bloody series of dots, is by helping one another do that. So it's that connection, it's that cross-generational conversation, it's the communication between the rabbis and the lay community, between the small synagogues and the larger communities, between, frankly, London and beyond, and there is a beyond for those of you who are in London, and not just the beyond in the UK, but beyond the UK, whether it's the Irish representation or way beyond that. We had South Africa on the screen a little bit earlier. It's utilizing those resources which are available to us. And one final thought. I'm sure, like all of you, Rebecca's conversation with Charlie earlier today was just fantastic. I mean, you know, we're tired, right? We've had 24, 36 hours of this, and here we go on talking about grief, and I was thinking, really? But she was fantastic, absolutely fantastic. And one of the things that she said that stuck with me that I think I'd like to end with, which is, she said, as a grieving person, she wanted people to think, what do you need in this moment? That's quite an interesting question. What do you need in this moment? And I think what we, as the LJ communities, need to ask is, what we should say to Charlie and Josh, or to Paul and Ruth, and to all the rabbinic and lay leaders, is not just, what can you do for us? But really, what can we do for you? Because it's that offering of what we can do for you, Charlie, that would enable this great vision to deliver what this community needs.
So that's what I'm taking away. Really, thank you, Ed. We have, I think, really in that spirit, we have a few minutes before we're going to enter our Mincha moment, which is a new for Biennial, to actually finish with a Mincha service rather than having a service on Sunday morning. But I do want to open the floor to you if there is anything that either answers that last question that Ed posed, or just something that, if you want to tell us that what you're taking away, or something that we need to know that we're leaving, whether that's what LJ matters or beyond, then this is your moment. The floor is yours. Becca has a mic. Oh, we can go straight to Mincha.
They all agree.
Perfect. Mark. Mincha. Monique. Lovely. We've got to reset? Okay, we can reset. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Ed.
Judith's joining on Zoom.
On. Oh. Two quick announcements. One is that the coach will be leaving at 4:10, the shuttle bus. The other one is that, just a reminder that any of you who would like to see Rebecca again, or know of somebody who would like to see her, then the ARC are hosting her tomorrow, 5 until 7 o'clock. And it is open to all. You do not need to register. You can bring, it's not just from Jewish communities, it's open to all communities. Anybody who would like to see her, she will be at the ARC from 5 to 7 o'clock tomorrow. Following that, if you're still feeling the need for some extra input, then Hyas and JCOR have the Asylum Seekers and Refugees Experiences of an Australian Rabbi, 7:30 on Zoom, and you can come and get the QR code to register from me at any point. I think that's all. Jane is waving. Oh, please leave your lanyards in reception. That way we can recycle them. Is that everything? I forget anything? No? Good. Monique? Oh, you mean, isn't there the other one?
There's no mic up. Take that. Okay. So just in case you were wondering, I am not Rabbi Mark Solomon. Some of you, he's sitting back there. It's lovely to be with you again in this closing service, and I'm especially feeling blessed to be doing this with my good friend and colleague, Rabbi Judith Levitt, who she will be appearing shortly, and we're sharing this service. It's all up there. Oh. Judith, we can't hear you. Judith, we can't hear you yet. No, not yet. Bear with. Try now, Judith.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you. Yay! And I forgot to mention how wonderful it is. Like, we don't usually do a mincha service, so it is quite lovely to have everybody together. So I think you're going to start us off, right? You're going to bring us into this. Okay.
I hope everyone's had a wonderful biennial. I've certainly enjoyed everything I've participated in over Zoom. I'm Rabbi Judith Levitt. I'm a freelance liberal rabbi who works with communities and individuals. Due to disability, 99% of my work is online. I'm the founder of Abraham Sarah's Tent, an online community for those still shielding, disabled, struggling with mental illness, or anyone who cannot access the physical synagogue. Whether you lead or are a member of another community, you can join. We welcome everyone, Jewish or exploring their Judaism. You can find Abraham Sarah's Tent on Facebook. I'm deeply honoured to be leading this service with my colleague, rabbinical school classmate, and dear friend, Rabbi Monique Mayer. We hope to lead a short, positive, and uplifting mincha service to conclude biennial. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel says, our goal should be to live life in radical amazement. Get up in the morning and look at the world in a way that takes nothing for granted. Everything is phenomenal. Everything is incredible. Never treat life passively. To be spiritual is to be amazed. And Asher is on page 63, but I believe it will be on screen.
Ashrei Yoshvei Beitecha Od Yahalelucha Od Yahalelucha Ashrei Yoshvei Veitecha Od Hallelujah Od Hallelujah. Happy are those who dwell in your house, who are ever singing your praise. Happy the people on whom such blessing falls.
We now pray for those in need of healing, whether physically, mentally, emotionally, or spiritually. And I believe there is a beautiful Lisa Levine Mishabera that has come up on the screen.
Some of you may know this. Yeah, keep going. Keep going. There we go. Thank you. Okay. So even if you can't see the verses, there is an echo in the chorus. So it's, hear our prayer, 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 and bless us as well. So the last part doesn't repeat. Okay, so you can join in on that. Mi sheberach avotenu, Avraham, Yitzchak, v'Yaakov. Mi sheberach imotenu, Sarah, Rivka, Leah, v'Rachel. May the one who blessed our mothers, may the one who blessed our fathers, hear our prayer. Hear our prayer. Hear our prayer. Hear our prayer and bless us as well. Bless us with the power of your healing. Bless us with the power of your hope. May the warmth of friendship ease our sorrow. Give us courage, give us faith, show us the way. Mi sheberach avotenu, Avraham, Yitzchak, v'Yaakov. Mi sheberach imotenu, Sarah, Rivka, Leah, v'Rachel. May the one who blessed our mothers, may the one who blessed our fathers, hear our prayer. Hear our prayer. Hear our prayer. Hear our prayer and bless us as well. Brucha at makor chaim, amevia shlemut lechol hacholim. We praise you, source of life, who brings wholeness to all who are sick.
This quote seems appropriate for a biennial where we've made so many beautiful connections with one another. Martin Luther says, "Spirit is not in the eye, but between I and you." And we now come to a very abbreviated Haggadah on page 62. Just noted, but you can Zoom, it's very hard to see the screen with the text on it. I don't know if anyone else is finding that. I'm fine because I have it all in front of me, but I think for participants on Zoom, it's very hard to see the text on screen. Okay, 62. And please forgive me for not standing. It's a struggle for me.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu v'Elohei avotenu v'imotenu, Gen Avraham v'Ezrat Sarah, Mechaya Metim Ha'el HaKadosh. In your ways, consecrate our hearts to revere you. Forgive us and make us worthy of redemption. Keep us far from sorrow. Bestow blessing on the earth. Freedom for the oppressed. Guide us in your ways of justice. Let those who go astray turn to you. May the righteous rejoice in the building. And behold the dawn of your deliverance. In your compassion, may the eternal God, whom we worship and reverence, source of goodness, Baruch atah Adonai, Oseh HaShalom. Oseh Shalom Bimromav. Uyaseh Shalom Aleinu. Ve'al kol Yisrael. Ve'al kol Bnei Adam. Yaseh Shalom. Yaseh Shalom. Shalom Aleinu, V'al kol Yisrael, Yaseh Shalom, Yaseh Shalom, Shalom Aleinu, V'al kol Yisrael, Yaseh Shalom, Yaseh Shalom, Shalom Aleinu, V'al kol Yisrael, Yaseh Shalom, Yaseh Shalom. Shalom Aleinu, V'al kol bnei Adam.
Today is your Sivan. The mother or constellation for Sivan is twin. Sivan is known as the month in which we became a people. We received the Torah at Har Sinai on the 6th day of Sivan. Shavuot, Man Matan Torah, the season of giving of our Torah. According to Midrash, everyone at Mount Sinai heard the giving of the Torah according to who they were and their strength. The story of friendship is integral to Shavuot. Megillat Ruth, the story of Ruth and Naomi, is chanted or read. Sivan is a time to rededicate ourselves to others, to the deep bonds of friendship that sustain us. And we now turn to page 59.
Amen. 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 Baruch atah Adonai, Shotecha levadecha, Rana avod. We pray.
And we now turn to page 475 for a brief Hallel. It is better to take refuge in God than to rely on human beings.
It is better to take refuge in God than to rely on those in power. Blessed are you who come in God's name. You are my God, and I thank you. Give thanks to the Eternal One who is good. Hodu la Adonai ki tov, ki leolam chasto, leolam chasto. Hodu la Adonai ki tov, ki leolam chasto. Hodu la Adonai ki tov, ki leolam chasto, ki leolam chasto, ki leolam chasto, ki leolam chasto. Hodu la Adonai ki tov, כי לעולם חסדו, לעולם חסדו.
The latest is on page 520. And please stand if you are able. Alleluia.
אשר שמחה כאילו ליחד את שמו בגורלנו. אנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא. מושב יקרא בשמיים ממעל ושכינתו זו בגופי מרמים הוא אלוהינו אין עוד אמת מלכנו אפס סולתו ככתוב בתורתו וידעת היום בהשבותו אל לבביך כי אדוני הוא האלוהים בשמיים ממעל
And out of the fall, we make whole again. May we live with promise in creation's lap, redemption budding in our hands.
ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו אחד.
Life is silent, like a candle, it burns, it glows, it is radiant with warmth and beauty. Then it fades, its substance is consumed, and it is no more. Yet we do not despair. We know that we are more than a flickering flame. With our lives we give life. Something of us can never die. We move in the eternal cycle of darkness and light, of death and life. And in our hearts we name our loved ones. We pray that the divine presence will comfort us and all who mourn. If you have a loved that you are honouring at this time, or someone worth particularly remembering, I invite you to say out loud if you're in the room, or unmute yourselves if you're on Zoom or on the live stream, and to say the name of the person you are remembering, or to just hold them in your heart.
שמי רבה, ביום דברה חירותי וימליך מלכותי, בחייכון וביומכון ובחיי דכל בית ישראל, בעגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מבורך לעולם ולעולמי עולמיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם. שמי דקודשה בריחו. העלה מכל ברכתה ושירתה, תשבחתה ונחמתה, דמי אמרו אמן. וישלם הרבה מן שמיה, וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ואמרו אמן. עשה שלום במרומה, הוא יעשה שלום. עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ועל כל בני אדם, ואמרו אמן. So you can be seated. And as we come to a close, this service, this day, this conference, let us take the memories, the laughs, the dancing, and all those other thoughts and stimulating ideas that you've bubbled up from other people and with each other and connected with each other, being together in this room together, and also joining with the people who are on Zoom and coming together in joy. So we're not actually going to sing that, but I will say, Ivdu et Adonai b'simcha, serve God or whatever God is for you. I had a congregant a number of years ago that said, I don't believe in God, but whatever God is, that's what I believe in. So however that works for you. So we're going to sing Hine Ma Tov. And if you want to get up and dance while we're singing it, that's fine too. So I know you just sat down. Hine ma tov u'manayim shebetachim gam yachad. Hine ma tov u'manayim shebetachim gam yachad. Hine ma tov, hine ma tov. Yadadai, dadadai, dadadai, dadai. Hine ma tov, hine ma tov. Yadadai, dadadai, dadadai, dadai. Hine ma tov u'manayim shevitachim gam yachad. Hine ma tov u'manayim shevitachim gam yachad. Adonai yishmor tzeitcha uvoecha. The Eternal shall guard your going out and your coming in. And actually, I'm going to invite everybody to stand. I know you just sat, but please rise if you're able. And let's bless each other in this space together as we finish off. I hope that's okay, Judith, because you're not on screen now, so I've preempted her. Yavarachenu Adonai v'yishmarenu. May God bless us and keep us. Ya'er Adonai panav eleinu v'yichunenu. May God shine God's face on us and be gracious to us. Yisa Adonai panav eleinu v'yasem lanu shalom. And may God lift up God's face towards us. May we look into each other's faces and see the image of God in each other. And may God grant us wholeness. Shalom. Peace. Amen.